Thank you very much, Dr. Michel de Hooge. It's my privilege now to introduce to you the next two speakers. And continuing on the theme of the 3 or 4 musketeers, there are probably 3, maybe 4 reasons why I'm excited to introduce to you the next two speakers. The first thing is Nicol will continue on the theme of hamstring injuries and the importance of diagnosing and rehabilitation of these injuries. But both Nicol and Andrea are great friends and physiotherapists at Aspetar, and I've consistently learned a huge amount from my physiotherapy colleagues traveling around the world to different sporting events. So this is the first reason. The second reason, they are both excellent clinicians. And the third reason, they are both excellent scholars. So may I introduce to you Nicol van Dijk. Nicol is a South African trained physiotherapist, and he's currently sprinting for the PhD line under the supervision of Professor Eric Witfro and also Professor Roald Baar. His interest is predictive factors for hamstring injuries, and we look forward to listen to you, Nicol.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, just thank you to Dr. Landreau and Dr. Nere for the invitation to speak today. It's a real privilege to be part of this session, and I'm going to be talking about predictable factors for hamstring injuries. So I have no disclosures to make other than I am indeed South African and used to work with Dr. Willem van der Merwe down in Cape Town before moving to Aspetar. And Aspetar is an incredible place to be involved in. And just to say at the start, the nature of Aspetar allows us to collaborate. And there's been many individuals that have contributed to the work I'll present today. You might recognize some of their names, and some of them are here. But this is one of the wonderful advantages we have at Aspetar. Now, we've just had an excellent summary about why hamstring injuries are still the #1 injury in football. But what about them are predictable? And that started to make me think, what can we predict in football? Now, maybe I can just say, Dr. de Hooge, thank you for that great presentation, and I think his contribution to football cannot be underestimated. And one of the reasons is that he's still, apart from being the chairman of the FIFA Medical Committee, probably Club Bruges' #1 fan. So I just like to remind all the Belgians in the room that last year they didn't have it all their own way, and since I'm a student at Ghent as well, I'm hoping that something will happen this season. But indeed, it is going well in Belgium. This is the FIFA ranking for Belgium in the last 6 years, and they've gone from number 66 to #1 in the world. So I don't think many of us would have predicted that 6 years ago. So the clubs in Belgium are okay. I think we don't need to worry about them. There are other clubs where I think we have more concern. This is the injury list for Liverpool. You don't have to pay too much attention, but every red line is a hamstring injury. Now, coincidentally, this started when Jurgen Klopp took over in October last year. And I'm sure he's not pleased that he's already had 15 hamstring injuries this season. And as we just heard, you can expect about 5. So that's 3 times more than we would expect normally. Now, I'm not holding my breath, but I thought that if Jurgen gave me a call and we had to talk about hamstring injuries, what are the things we would really want to speak about? And I think there's 3 important ones. The first is, can we identify risk factors reliably? The second is, what do we know about return to play? Can we predict when a player will be ready? And then injury prevention. So if we start with the risk factors, I won't go into too much detail. There's been a host of excellent publications, both prospective and retrospective, looking at different risk factors, and we've just heard them mentioned already, but you can take your pick. They've all been shown in some way to be associated with hamstring injury. In 2013, Grant Freckleton and Tanya Pizzari did an excellent systematic review, and they reduced the list to these factors that were really important. Now, 2 of them we can't do anything about, so I'll take away previous injury and age. But the strength is certainly something we can still do something about. I have to say, eccentric strength didn't really get in. I've left it in, it got pretty close, but the strength is something we can still change. And that was one of the questions we had here at Aspetar. Very simply, can we identify strength as a risk factor for hamstring injury? Why did we need to do another study, you might ask? Well, one of the limitations always has been small sample sizes. So now we had the opportunity to do a very large study. Over 4 seasons, we were able to include 600 subjects, over 100 or 190 injuries, and almost 2,000 isokinetic measurements. So this allows us to really look at all the different strength factors. And here's a list of isokinetic strength measurements we did at different speeds, both concentric and eccentric, normalized to body weight, and in the different ratios. So out of all these factors, we identified these 2, and you'll see that this correlates well with the literature. Quads concentric strength normalized to body weight, and hamstrings eccentric strength normalized to body weight. Now, if I, instead of showing you the significant p-value, show you the effect size, many of the clinicians in the room that are familiar with isokinetic testing will know that 7 Newton meters on an isokinetic test is not a lot. And clinically, in fact, less than the variance we see. And that doesn't really help us as clinicians. So unfortunately, although there are indeed risk factors, these risk factors doesn't always help us to know who's at risk. If I plot here the distribution of the uninjured players, what we see is when we add the injured players, they're in the same group. So it will be hard to distinguish, if we do this pre-season screening, which players are really at risk. And we found the same for our eccentric hamstring strength. So now we're still not quite sure which are the players that we need to target. And we're probably not quite enthusiastic, but we'll move on then to the second thing. And that is return to play expectation. Now, that's the first question we all get asked by the player, by the coach, and by the media. When will he play again? And we feel like we have to give an answer, but I think our answer is often based on our clinical experience, and it's hard to really say. At best, we're guessing when he'll get back. Before I go on, I'll just say that there are certain things now we know that makes your return to play take longer. If there's central tendon involvement as shown by Bruckner and Connell in this recent review, and also confirmed by Noel Pollock's group with the British classification, they do take longer. And if there's total proximal tears, like Dr. De Uge just pointed out, they will take longer. Indeed, they might be better candidates for surgery. So if we just leave them to the side, and we look at the ones that we see most often, the grade 1s and 2s, what about those injuries? What can we say about those injuries? Well, this study by Martin Moon and the Dutch group showed the most closely correlated factor was the self-predicted time to return to play by the player himself. So if you want to know when he'll get back, you can just ask him to tell you, and that's probably as close as you'll get. But I know that's not good enough. We all want to do better than that. So here at Aspetar, we've also investigated the additional value of MRI. Now, before I go on, I will say that Jan Ekstrand's excellent work with the UEFA group has had some different results, and there might be different reasons for that. But here at Aspetar, we found that the additional value of MRI have only been able to give us an extra 3% of explanation. So 3%, that doesn't sound so great. What about our clinical examination? Well, here we seem to do a little bit better. So Phil Jacobson and Rod Whiteley here at Aspetar have done a lot of hamstring work, and they've just a few days ago published this paper looking at our physical measurements. Indeed, again, they didn't find any additional value of MRI, but if we do our examination, we might be able to predict the return to play a little better. The initial examination was okay, about 60%, but plus or minus 23 days. So if I say to you, you'll take 25 days to get back, that might be 2 days or it might be 50 days. And that's not so good. The MRI, again, in isolation, less than 10%, so we don't really think that has value at the moment. But our week 1 examination was very valuable. And that included measurements from the initial exam, including strength, flexibility, time to the start of the treatment, a whole host of them. You can read the paper for the full list, and I won't go into detail. But this allowed us to explain 97% of the variance with a 10-day window, plus 5 days or minus 5 days. So what does that mean? So I'll explain it in this graph. This is really simple. On the y-axis, you have our predicted return to play, and on the x-axis, you have the actual return to play. So if I say, the blue line in the middle is if I'm 100% right. So if I say to you, it'll take 10 days, it'll take 10 days. Now, in our study, if we said 25 days, which is our mean recovery, it took 25 days. And that 97% means we could explain almost all the variance we see when it's not exactly that 25 days with this 5-day window. Now, I think that's pretty good. That's a really good, honest answer we can give the player and the coach as to how long we'll get back. Whether that 5 days is still too much in elite sports, that might be, because he has to play in the final, but that's a really honest answer we can give. So we're happy about that, so am I. I think now we're getting somewhere. But then there's one more thing, and Dr. de Hoog already touched on this, and that's injury prevention. This is a tweet that recently was very popular on Twitter about Dylan Shield, is an AFL player in Australia, and he's doing a razor curl. So it's a really popular buzz exercise now, the Nordic hamstring exercises, these eccentric hamstring exercises. Everybody's talking about them, and when you see something like this, you immediately think you should be okay. Now, how new is this exercise? Well, I found this, Mario Cardinale actually put this up on Twitter. In 1880, this Health by Exercise book was published by Geo Taylor. And then in 2011, the Peterson study really popularized this exercise again. So it only took us 130 years to realize how valuable eccentric exercise can be for hamstring injuries. So this knowledge has been around, and we are really trying to now quantify the data. So this is just an example. There are many now, and I know there's exciting things happening in Cape Town, but we're able to now use, technology has caught up to where we are to allow us to show the player where he's weak, where he's strong, and even take this out to the field. So we're not restricted anymore, and this is Dr. Tony Shields, his group at the Queensland University of Technology have done amazing work with this exercise and with this device. Why is it important? So if we group together the results from all the Nordic hamstring RCTs, you'll see that although both groups have similar numbers of players, the Nordic groups, the guys who do their eccentric exercise, had 25 injuries, while the control groups had 77. Now, that's a 67.5% reduction in injuries. And that's undeniable. That's why this exercise is part of the FIFA 11 Plus. And I think we cannot deny anymore the value of doing these eccentric exercises. Just as an example, this is a slide from David Opar. These exercises might even help us to modify the non-modifiable risk factors. So the red line at the top, that's the older players, the 33-year-olds. And you'll see how, as their strength on the x-axis gets stronger, their risk for an injury drops down into this section where they actually have the same risk as all the other players. So there are many other studies now that have looked at different aspects, but this is an example of how good this exercise can be for us in terms of prevention. So hopefully by the end of my conversation with Jürgen, he's a believer, and I'll just remind him then of what we've discussed. So my take-home predictions for today: can we identify risk factors? We certainly can, but we have to remember and try and understand what that means for the individual player. And in that sense, we still have work to do. Can we predict return to play? I believe we can, but within a certain range, and it's really important for us to start being honest about that with the doctors, the coaches, and the media. And is prevention possible? It certainly is, and we should all be doing our Nordics with our football players. Thank you very much.